Myles, what's happening, brother?
What's up, y'all? I'm so happy to be back.
Dude, we caught you right before you're heading out to Austin for good on Saturday, right?
Not necessarily for good, but definitely through the end of the year. Yeah.
I like how you're making this stipulation like very early. You're like, hey guys, not for good.
Well, yeah, it's been one, it makes it harder to like say goodbye to people if you think it's for good, but also like it's in my mind it could go either way, you know. I have such an amazing community here, and that's been the best thing about Austin by far. I'm definitely ready to like change it up for a little bit, but you know, when I think about, as I told you guys, I'm planning to do New York for the summer and then Costa Rica for a little bit. But when I think about coming back to the United States, which I do want to do, this is definitely one of the places that I would consider, and one of only a few, really.
Yeah, so you'll be in New York in the summer, and then Costa Rica after that, and then just TBD afterwards.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, and I would say changing it up is probably a good phrase to describe you too, because we were saying before we hit record just how the three of us got connected. We're another amazing example of like the connections that you can actually make and the friendships that you can build off of Twitter.
Correct.
We had gotten connected. We were DMing a little bit back and forth in March of last year, and I was still living in San Diego at the time. And I was telling you I would take calls on the bay. It was like this beautiful bay in San Diego. And I thought that we would maybe have like a 15, 20-minute intro call. And we ended up talking for like an hour and a half. We were talking about food, your experience in the jungle, soul bra, Bitcoin, having 6 kids, Christianity. It was like
we touched it all in that
topics.
conversation. Yeah.
The first time we met, I just remember this. The first time we met you was at KetoCon, right? I just remember you.
in person,
I just remember you hearing like you were like the Meat Mafia guys, and we're like,
yeah. But it felt like we'd known you, and we already had you on the podcast for episode 42.
Oh yeah, we did the podcast before we met at KetoCon, right?
Yes.
Or we do it right after?
We did it before.
We did it before. Okay.
Yeah, because it was April, and then KetoCon was in August.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. I remember that conversation too, and I remember where I was walking because there was a spot on the east side where I would always take calls. And yeah, that was an awesome conversation. I just remember we covered so much. Like I remember specifically, you had asked me, you were like, "Why do you think there's such a strong overlap between like Bitcoiners and people who are really into real food and all these other things?" And we went down kind of a cool rabbit hole talking about that.
That was a cool rabbit hole. And I know we covered your backstory in episode 42, but the journey that you've been on to where you are now is so interesting, from like cooking in the jungle to hedge funds to crypto to kind of like pivoting back into the cooking space and chasing this entrepreneurial path. I think we have to dig into that for the audience because it's such a great story.
Let's do it. Where do you want to start?
I probably just, I mean, I know your mom, your mom has had a culinary background, and then you went to school at NYU, and then probably picked that up right when you graduated, taking an unconventional path in Mexico.
Yeah. So I went to school at Fordham in New York.
Yeah.
But yeah, I grew up. So my mom is like a classically trained chef, and she ran a catering company. And just grew up in a family where good food was always around. And I definitely took that for granted when I was growing up because I thought it was normal. And then I went to college and really saw like, okay, not everyone eats this well all the time. But like a core part of my family experience growing up was like having big family meals. My mom cooked for us almost every night. She was an incredible cook. And I definitely showed an early interest in it, probably more so than any of my other siblings. But hadn't really considered it as like a career path at all until I was in college. And especially going to college and then kind of like living on my own, I really started to dive deeper into like cooking and getting really into food, and really fell in love with it in a very deep way. And I was studying economics, so I wasn't like on any culinary path, but I decided that after I graduated that I really wanted to go do something with cooking, at least for a little bit. And because I had studied abroad in Argentina, I spoke Spanish, and I was always fascinated by Mexican food. It was always my favorite cuisine. And so I got this idea randomly. I was like, I should look into cooking schools in Mexico, see if there's anything there. It's probably going to be cheaper than it would be here. And I ended up finding a really cool program that was just like 6 months. It wasn't like classical training or like almost, I don't want to say it wasn't a real cooking school because it was, but it was basically like a short program focused on exploring different regions of Mexican cuisine and learning some of those kind of core techniques and recipes. And it was amazing. It was taught by these all my instructors were like these Mexican grandmas who would just teach us these like super cool techniques that are very unique to Mexican food, and learned a ton about the different regions and sort of the history and the food anthropology and all the stuff that goes into that. And it was just amazing. And so as those like 6 months were coming to an end, I was living in Mexico City, just having like the time of my life. And I was like, there's no way I'm going back and like getting a real job. I remember specifically, I like called my mom and I had this conversation with her where I was like, I am just like really resonating with what I'm doing here. And I think I need to figure out a way to stay. And so that's when I was like, I should go work at a restaurant. I just knew that that would be the opportunity for me to learn the most and learn the fastest. And so I had read about this restaurant, Heartwood in Tulum. They were getting a lot of press at the time because they had just published a cookbook. And I literally just cold emailed the chef like 3 times, finally got a response. And he was like, yeah, come down here and work. And so I did. I think on the last podcast, we kind of talked about like what that experience was like, and like super challenging in a lot of ways, but super rewarding. And I spent a year there cooking at this like amazing open fire restaurant in the jungle in Tulum. And then I went to Oaxaca for a bit, and I staged at a couple of restaurants there, and then ended up moving back to LA, where I worked for this company called Hacienda that I know you guys have shared some of their amazing products with me. But Hacienda, I was there for a little bit, and then I kind of came to this crossroads where I was working in food. I like wasn't really making any money. I kind of realized that I didn't want to be cooking professionally for the rest of my life, but then going the sort of like CPG restaurant supply route with Hacienda, I wasn't super excited about either. And I kind of was like, I don't really know how to fit my love for cooking and food into like a career path. And that's when I sort of pivoted and went back to some stuff that I was involved with in college, which was crypto and Bitcoin and stuff like that. So I got a job at Multicoin Capital, which is based here in Austin. That's what brought me here. And then kind of for the last 5 years, I've been mostly professionally in crypto and then doing kind of stuff in food on the side. And as time has gone on, that food stuff, especially in the last like year and a half, has really started to grow. And I think we can talk about that because I think we're all doing similar stuff with regards to like putting a lot of content out there, focusing a lot on Twitter. And so it's finally reached a little bit of an inflection point where, it's not something I'm doing full time right now, but it's something that I could see that happening. But more importantly, it's like it's hit that inflection point where I'm putting stuff out. People are resonating with that. I'm getting really good feedback, and I'm building all these incredible relationships like us meeting entirely through Twitter and resonating with each other's like philosophies and ideas and things like that.
The part that I love most about your story is the fact that you were willing to make that move. And because I think a lot of kids, when they graduate college, they just assume that they need to get on the track right away and start working on what is inevitably going to be their career. And you had been studying economics.
Yeah.
Like you becoming a chef was probably not even really like, all that quantifiable or real, but then you move and you just like fall in love with it.
Totally.
Was there a moment when you were down there that changed your perspective on food, or just like the importance of like how you want to treat, your cooking experiences and just like incorporate food into your life?
I think that like I specifically remember a time, and it was actually that same day that I called my mom and had that conversation with her. But I'd been there for like 5 months. I was, doing these classes, and I remember I actually like went that day to this amazing barbacoa restaurant. And in outside of Mexico City, there's a lot of sheep farming, and so they make this lamb barbacoa there, and it's like incredible. They wrap it in banana leaves and then like cook it in an oven, and it's got this amazing spice or this amazing like chili paste all over it, and they just like slow braise it. It's fall apart tender. And there was this one restaurant in Mexico City that served that like dish, very classic, these amazing homemade blue corn tortillas, this like incredible, they called it salsa negra, but it's like this really like jet black salsa that I think has some mezcal in it. And I had kind of been thinking all day just about how excited I was about cooking. And then I went and like had this meal that just like blew my socks off with the incredible flavor. And I was like, I've never been so in love with like an art or a practice or a skill as I have been with cooking and learning how to cook, getting better at cooking, like exploring all these different foods. And it was sort of in that moment that I was like, I think I need to figure out a way to keep doing this. And interestingly, like my career has kind of zigged and zagged since then. But growing up, I tried all these different things, from like different art forms and music and filmmaking and this and that. And like I remember specifically in that moment being like, I found the thing. This is like the thing that I'm good at and I love and I want to do forever.
Dude, it's funny you say that, because Chef's Table is my favorite documentary of all time. And I love, my favorite episode is the episode on Francis Malm. And I've made Harry watch it like 3 times because it's so good. And, you know, Fire Door, really famous open fire cooking restaurant in Australia. But I remember one of the interesting parts of the documentary was he was like a classically trained chef. And I think he was in France working at a bunch of 3 Michelin-star restaurants.
Yep.
And he said he had reached this point in his career where he was almost like disgusted with what he was making, because there was like so much like intricacy to the dishes, but he was like, they don't really taste good. They don't really taste like anything. And then I think he ended up kind of similar venture to you. I think he was in Spain or Argentina or something like that and stumbled upon that one guy's restaurant. And that's when he had first tried the open fire cooking.
Yeah.
Super simple ingredients, amazing technique. And it was like, it completely changed his perspective on food forever. And there was no going back. And then he started just working at that restaurant.
Yeah. So is that the story of the Australian chef or
the Australian chef? Oh, sorry, not Francis. The dude that runs Fire Door. He's like a younger guy.
I know who you're talking about, but yeah. And he, his stuff looks incredible. Like I got to make a trip to, he's in Melbourne, right?
He's in Melbourne. Yeah.
But yeah, I can resonate with that. Like I am terribly like bored by a lot of like modern food. And I think that like the best cooking, in my opinion, happens when you just source really high quality ingredients and you don't have to do that much to them because nature's already done so much of the work. But wood fire offers this like incredible combination of, you know, you get really high heat. You get these flavors from the compounds in the wood that are burning. You get kind of this like beautiful imprecision that comes through and makes the food very soulful. Like it's not this like sous vide, super precise and sciencey food. And so those are all qualities that like literally make the food taste better. But then there's also just this aspect of like you're outside cooking and you're very like, it's a more soulful way to cook. It's more in touch with nature. And I think once you taste that, the idea of like being in some laboratory type setting doing your cooking just doesn't feel as cool anymore.
Yeah. One of the things you talk about a lot is techniques over recipes, which I just in general is a great way to frame not only cooking, but just life in general. Like have a good framework, not necessarily the scientific like protocol to do something. And I would love to just unpack that a little bit. Like where did that light bulb go off, or when did that light bulb go off for you?
So I can't remember like a specific time that light bulb went off for me, but it's like I've been cooking, I've cooked professionally for a long time. And then, you know, as a very dedicated home cook, and like, I don't use recipes almost ever. I do use them, but not in the way that most people use them. You know, they're kind of like a reference point or you get ideas from them, but I can't remember the last time I followed a recipe like exactly or step for step. And the reason is that when you're cooking, you're using these like organic compounds that are so different depending on the time of year or what farm you get them from or how fresh they are. There's so many factors. So when you don't need to follow someone else's recipe because they were using different products than you were. And with a lot of recipes, it's like the exact measurements, the heat levels, the times you cook them, those are all very flexible. And I sometimes see that people will follow recipes very specifically and they'll go against what their sort of gut tells them to do, where it's like, this thing is about to burn, but it says 7 minutes per side, so I'm going to let it go. And it's like, no, that's not how you need to do it. You need to have these like frameworks, these techniques, and then use your senses to guide you towards the outcome that you want. That's what cooking is all about. It's a very sensory thing. And so a framework could be, or a technique could be like the reverse sear. I know you guys are both familiar with this, but it's like, you know that you cook a piece of meat at a very low temperature until you hit a certain temp that you want. And then you're going to sear it over really high heat. But like depending on whether that's like a cowboy ribeye or a picanha or something, like the cook time and the sear time and the heat levels you use are all going to be different, but you have the framework and you have the outcome that you want, and then you're going to use your senses to get you there. And I think for a lot of people, learning to get better at cooking is learning those frameworks, those like fundamentals, the kind of like principles that they can use as starting points, and then learning to use and trust their senses. But it's not that hard. It's very like, that's in all of us as humans, you know?
Totally. And I think one of the things that was so attractive about you to us, and like why we wanted to learn more about your skill set, is I think you were one of the first people that showed us that, you know, whether it's like carnivore, meat-based, paleo, or just eating real foods, whatever your diet is, it doesn't need to be so boring, monotonous, and flavorless.
Totally.
Right? Like there are a lot of carnivores that are content just doing like ribeye, salt, and butter, and that's great. And some people can do that. Or some people are really sick and they need to heal, and that's all that they can tolerate. But like, I feel like there's this creativeness and these frameworks that you actually have that show, hey, I can still eat really healthy, but my food can be so delicious and bursting with flavor too.
Totally. I'm big on that. Cause I agree with you. If you, depending on the state of your health or your gut or things like that, it might be helpful to like really, really, really simplify, and that's okay. But I think for a lot of people, it's a matter of they just don't feel like they can make things more flavorful. And it's like the ribeye with salt and butter is the modern example, but we all remember the era of like grilled chicken breast and steamed broccoli for bodybuilders. And that to me is just insane, because you can make that same meal without changing the macros, without like increasing the calories or sugars or anything like that, but so much more flavorful, just using like spices or chilies or different forms of acidity or fresh herbs. And so, yeah, I really believe that, you can just, there are so many ways to like up the flavor of what you're doing and be more creative with it. And I think that you are going to be healthier if you do that, because you're going to enjoy your food more.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thought process going into sourcing really high quality food? Like, how do you go about getting the food that you're going to put on the table? And, you know, before we hit record, we were talking about how meat can taste different just based on the time of year that it's harvested.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of complexity there, but I'm just curious, like, what do you actually do when it comes to sourcing really high quality food?
Yeah. I've been kind of building a framework for this, especially as I start thinking about like teaching some of this stuff formally. But the way I think about it is like, start with your pantry, and specifically like salt and oil, because those are things that touch everything that you cook, right? Every time you cook, you're going to, generally speaking, use some sort of salt and some sort of fat. So start by making sure that you have like really high quality salt. I like Redmond. I know you guys do too. Mm-hmm. Grass-fed beef tallow, grass-fed ghee, organic olive oil, things like that. And then you can play around with some other like cool pantry staples, different types of vinegars, different types of spices. And those are kind of like that's like the core stack that you're going to use every time you cook, and you're going to use to like up the flavor in your food. Then I think the best sort of like framework is to think about trying to source like seasonally and locally as much as possible, especially for like the vegetables that you're eating, the fruits and vegetables that you're eating. So as much as you can, you should just aim to get those locally. And then when it comes to like meat and stuff, I think you should also aim to get it locally if you can, but there's a little bit more flexibility there to like get really high quality stuff shipped frozen that can still, you know, maintain good quality. So it's like, if you don't have access to it locally, there's a bunch of good resources to buy super high quality meat online. And for that, the framework is like, buy the absolute best quality that you can afford. And it's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Will you ever go to the grocery store?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say that I like here in Austin, I have a pretty good setup where between like local pastures and the market, I can get all of my meat super easily. But like, yeah, I'll go to Whole Foods and kind of pick up like staples here and there, or Salt and Thyme. Like I like small markets like that, like Tiny Grocer, Salt and Thyme, places where I can get cool kind of like artisanal quality stuff. But yeah, there's definitely like room for the grocery store. And also, you know, sometimes it's just a matter of convenience.
I feel like you're a great resource for really cool brands, like up and coming.
Yeah,
brands
I'm always
doing
nerding
cool
out on that.
Yeah. Anything that comes to top of mind.
There's this guy, maybe you've seen him on Twitter, called Extra Virgin Guy, but he's like an olive oil specialist. and he just started his own olive oil brand. And I'll give him a shout out because I think he's just doing things really, really well. Like in my conversations with him, we started talking about another brand that does like plastic squeeze bottles for their olive oil. And he was talking about why he thinks that's unacceptable. And I started asking him about how he was sourcing, and just like his philosophy was very similar and his standards were very high. He was like, it has to be organic. That's a non-starter. There's a bunch of reasons why, especially with olive oil, organic is really important. Single origin, he's sourcing it all from this organic farm in Sicily. It's all really fresh, so he's only selling from the like most recent winter harvest. And I tried it, and it's just like super incredible olive oil. I've been putting it on everything.
And single origin's a really good sign that that's good quality olive oil.
Yeah. Oh, it's called Palancino, by the way.
Palancino.
Yeah. Single origin, it doesn't necessarily have to be like, it's similar with coffee, but it is a good sign because there's generally, you just have more insight into the supply chain. I would say more important with olive oil is getting organic, because if you think about it, those trees absorb a ton of stuff. So whatever you spray on the soil is going to make its way into the olives. And then you literally press the fat out of those olives. So if you have any fat soluble chemicals, those are going to make their way into the oil. So you can imagine, like, if a conventional orchard is sprayed with pesticides, you're getting that in the oil.
How can you make sure that you're not getting that? Is it just as simple as an organic label, or the label that?
Yeah, an organic label on olive oil, I'd say, is probably like the best thing to look for. And I only learned this recently, so this is something that I've kind of changed up. And then I buy all of my olive oil online because I think you can just get much better. You can get better, fresher olive oil, and you have a lot more insight into the supply chain of the companies. So Palancino I really like, and then Zim's Organics is another one that I like that does domestic organic olive oil.
Is there a cuisine that you think the beginner should start with, like Mexican, Italian? I mean,
that's a really good question. I never thought about that. I think that I don't think there's one specific cuisine that like lends itself. Interestingly, if you're a classically trained chef, you're trained in French cuisine. I personally think classical training is very overrated. With all due respect to the French, who have done an incredible amount of work to like codify cooking and teach it really well.
We just lost our entire French audience.
Sorry, y'all. But I think you just start with what you are most interested in, because then you'll cook it the most. Like for me, I always really loved Mexican food. I thought it was very fascinating. I loved those flavors a lot, and I knew that I could eat it every day. So it was like an easy pick. But yeah, I think it just kind of depends on what you're into. Like if you really love Italian food, get a really good Italian cookbook and like cook your way through it.
I have a hard-hitting question for you.
Yeah.
Why is the carbon steel pan the patrician's pan in your opinion? Because you got us on carbon steel, and there's no going back after you sear a steak in carbon steel.
There's no going back.
In the show notes.
Because we posted about this and people were going crazy on Twitter.
It's an ongoing debate that doesn't seem to end. And what's funny is the debate was between cast iron and carbon steel. And I'm like, no, there's a third option that's the best. So carbon steel is my favorite cookware by far. The most used pan in my kitchen is my carbon steel. Carbon steel is basically, it gets you all the properties of cast iron. So really good heat retention, incredible durability. It can stand up to really high heat, and it seasons, so it gets better over time. But it's also a lot lighter than cast iron, like 50% lighter in most cases. And so what that gets you is, one, it's just easier. Two is that you have better heat control because the pan will respond to heat faster. Like if you turn down the heat, that pan will cool down a lot faster than a cast iron would. Cast iron is like this very thick metal, so it takes a long time to heat up and then a long time to cool down. Carbon steel is a lot more responsive, and I don't think cast iron necessarily does anything better than carbon steel. So it's lighter, more responsive, and does all the same things. The other thing is just the way that most carbon steel pans are built, I think is better. Like cast iron pans tend to have these very short handles, whereas carbon steel will have like a longer handle, which makes it easier to move. And then they'll also have, most of the time, we'll have sloped edges. So because it seasons over time, it basically becomes your nonstick pan. And then you don't have to use a toxic nonstick or even like a ceramic that goes bad over time. Like I scramble eggs in my carbon steel pan.
Wow.
And so I love it. The only thing I'll say that I think, I still have stainless steel and I use it occasionally. If you are cooking like a tomato sauce, it's better to do that in a stainless steel pan because the acidity will strip away some of the seasoning in the carbon steel. But if you're mostly cooking like steaks and meats and stuff, it's the best pan by far.
So the carbon steel is making it to New York.
I'm bringing, dude, I have, I want to give another shout out to a cool brand. They're called Athena Skillets out of Virginia.
Okay.
And they sent me the hand forged carbon steel skillet that this guy made. It is incredible. It's so beautiful, so like ergonomic and well made and well designed. They're really expensive, but that pan is amazing. So I'm bringing that and my made in carbon steel, as well as like 2 other pieces of carbon steel cookware.
The essentials.
Yeah.
So, all right. So carbon steel, single origin olive oil. What are some other like non-negotiables or essentials for you in terms of just either ingredients or cookware that you're like, I wish everyone knew about this and should be using it in their own kitchen?
Yeah. The carbon steel is the first one that comes to mind because I don't feel like as many people know about it, but definitely the essentials are like a really good quality chef's knife. Like that's worth spending money on and buying a good one. I don't believe in knife sets because mostly they're trying to sell you too many knives that you don't need at an inflated price. It's like spend the money to get one really high quality 8-inch chef's knife. And then your other knives, like a paring knife or a bread knife, you can just get, something that's not as expensive, but a good quality chef's knife will last you forever. Learn to take good care of it. It's an incredible tool, definitely non-negotiable. And then a really good quality wooden cutting board, I think is super important. You basically only need one if you have a good quality one. Wood is more aesthetic. It looks better. It brings better energy to your kitchen. It has amazing natural antimicrobial properties. And it's not going to leach microplastics into your food like plastic cutting boards will. I think if I had a chef's knife, a wood cutting board, and a carbon steel skillet, I could make that work for most stuff. And then on the sort of like pantry side, I would say more people should be cooking with beef tallow for sure. Like I use olive oil and beef tallow for 90% of what I cook. It stands up to heat really well. You can fry in it. It has a fairly neutral taste, but it also lends a really nice like richness to a lot of food. But I feel like most of your listeners probably know that. I think where maybe people know less is 2 things. I think that good sources of acidity bring so much to your food, and liberal use of fresh herbs is another thing that I just think can bring a lot to people's food that a lot of people who are newer to cooking don't know. Just like every time you go to the grocery store, buy some cilantro, some parsley, maybe some mint, and like use that as a garnish, throw that on top of like whatever you're cooking. There's so much like flavor in fresh herbs, and they bring a lot of like freshness and brightness. Sometimes I'll just cook a steak, chop it up into pieces, and then put a ton of fresh herbs on top of it with some olive oil and some lemon, and then just like eat that with my hands. Dude. And it's like, herbs are super nutrient dense. They're not going to like fuck up your macros or anything like that. And they bring this incredible flavor to that. And then on the acidity side is like seasoning, generally speaking, refers to both like salt and acidity. And you can kind of think about them as 2 sides of the same coin, but like everyone knows to salt their food. But if your food ever feels flat, you can experiment with adding some acidity. So a squeeze of lemon juice, like a splash of some really good vinegar, and that's going to bring a lot of brightness. It contrasts with other flavors. Like if there's a lot of fat or starch in what you're eating, that acidity can really help like balance that out. And so, yeah, I think if you play around with those things, like I always keep lemons on deck, but like some really high quality vinegar is a great thing to have. And not Bragg's apple cider vinegar, which is high quality from like a health perspective, but I'm talking about like good quality, like culinary vinegars.
I love what you're saying. The one thing that I would add is the Dutch oven to your toolkit. I love the Dutch oven just for like slow cooking stuff. Just think it's amazing. You can make a chuck roast for 2 or 3 days and just have that sitting around the house. It's such a great little tool.
Totally. There's another pan that Made In makes, the same company that does the carbon steel skillets, called a saucier. And it's like a stainless steel pot with a top on it. So you can braise in that too. And sometimes I'll just do that because it's like lighter than a Dutch oven. It's not as big, but like that I think is a really good thing for people to have because it's super versatile. And yeah, I agree. I love braising and I love making like soups and stews, and you can do it in that.
All right, let's take the conversation outside of the kitchen and talk about your wheelhouse, open fire cooking or grilling. What do people need to kind of think about when it comes to grilling? I feel like there's a lot of techniques and things that, you know, the Traeger's out there now, so it's getting a little simplified. But if someone's just getting started with a grill, what should they know?
Yeah, I've thought about this because I'm gonna write a like grilling guide for my newsletter. I got to get that out before summer, but so I think what I would start with is if you're gonna like buy a grill and spend time grilling, unless you're extremely time constrained, like if you have 6 children or something and like genuinely don't have time to use charcoal, then that's fine. Use gas, but charcoal grilling is like the best. And I think that a lot of people think it's more complicated and difficult than it is. If you have a charcoal chimney, you can get that thing started in 15 minutes, like all charcoal grill on weeknights, no problem. And charcoal grilling gets you a lot of the benefits of wood-fired grilling with like 100 times more efficiency. And so I know you guys just got a PK grill, which I'm stoked about because I think those are the best charcoal grills. Yeah.
You put that that thought in our mind.
Yeah, they really are the best. They're incredibly well-made charcoal grills. So I would encourage people to try grilling with charcoal. And I think like the basics of grilling are pretty easy to learn. It's like some basic kind of heat management, and you can do a lot of experimenting with just like cooking steaks and cooking vegetables on your grill. And the other thing I would encourage people to learn is like how to use the vent system on a charcoal grill, because that's actually plays a big factor in how your heat moves around. So if you maybe have used a charcoal grill, but just find yourself like dumping the charcoal in and then putting stuff on top of that, go online and look up how the vents work. And that will help you control the heat a lot more and do a lot more with your grill.
Sounds like a lot of people just think that these techniques are much more complicated than they really are. And it's really just a lack of knowledge. And like, dude, you can learn, you know, how to cook on a charcoal grill on YouTube. There's a ton of videos. There's cooking channels like you and your newsletter and everything like that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you, so when you first came on the show for episode 42, that was, I think April of last year. And we were talking about your newsletter because it was really successful. People loved it, but it was kind of more of like, just like a side, like passion project for you. You didn't have crazy big goals with it, but you enjoy doing it. It seems like the traction of what you've gotten on Twitter has like exploded the last year and a half. And I'm just curious, like, why you think that is. Is it more content, or people just like resonating with your message? I'm sure you've thought about it before, but I just keep seeing you all over Twitter.
Thank you. Yeah. I think people are resonating with it. I think also, you know, before I started doing Twitter and the newsletter, I was doing a lot of stuff on Instagram through the spice brand that my brother and I started. And then I also built up a big following on TikTok. What's interesting though is that the following on TikTok in terms of follower count was much bigger than I even have on Twitter now. And yet it never led to these like cool serendipitous moments or meeting people or getting opportunities. And I realized that Twitter has this cool combination of, one, there's very few people doing cooking content on there. Like I could probably name 10.
Yeah.
Whereas on Instagram or TikTok, there's literally thousands.
Yeah.
And so I think that's pretty interesting for people to think about. Like if you have a niche that is underserved on Twitter, I think there's a lot of opportunity to just stand out a little bit more there. And we all know that Twitter is like a ton of marketing and productivity and money stuff and this and that, but like there's a lot of other areas that I think people could see results on Twitter. And it also just is the way that Twitter works as a social network. It's just so much more likely to like DM someone who you resonate with and then hop on a call with them or things like that I think for me never happened with other social networks. So I think choosing that platform to focus on was something that I'm really glad that I did. And then I think outside of that, I think people are just resonating with the message, like I'm doing my best to let people know that like good cooking is not that complicated. There's so much like gatekeeping in the culinary world. And I think ego has a lot to do with it. And there's just people who make cooking seem like it's a lot more complex than it really is. And if you really love cooking and want to go really deep on it, you can spend the rest of your life experimenting and getting better and doing cool stuff. But like, even if your goal is just to feed yourself and eat better at home and feed your family a little bit better, like you can, in the course of a month or two, you can level up so substantially that it'll blow your mind.
I know you're not a recipe guy, but do you have a recipe that you're like, you give to people to be like, just try this will get you going in the right direction, build some momentum? Because so many people, you're so right, like the gatekeeping just creates fear and people just are like, oh, I can't cook, I'm not a good cook.
Totally.
Like, come on, you got to try.
So I think that I'll say first off, the braise recipe, so like just braising a chuck roast, I think is a really good thing for people, because it's like, it's fairly easy, but I think a lot of people who haven't cooked a lot were like, oh, I'm never gonna like braise something, I don't even know how that works. But you can break that down for them pretty simply. Like the core technique is very simple. There's a lot of ways you can modify it depending on what flavor profile you want. And I know a lot of people who didn't know how to do that. I sent them the guide that I wrote to it. They followed the steps and then they were like, holy shit, I was just able to do that. But I think generally what I've learned, because a few months ago, I started doing culinary coaching, which was like, it's like fitness coaching, but for cooking. And I did that to kind of gather some data for the course that I'm building. But what I noticed was that it's not even about the specific technique. There's sort of this thing that happens when you are there to offer guidance and feedback to someone. You can say to them like, hey, here's the steps to follow and here's how to go about it, and explain it in a way that's approachable and lets them know that like, hey, not everything has to be perfect. If like this or that goes wrong, it's not going to ruin it. And sort of giving them the confidence to then go try that thing. And then the people will go and do it. And then they come back and they're like, oh my God, I just, broke through this like limiting belief that I had around what I could cook. And I think it takes that, it's like you just need to give people the confidence to then go do it, because people will execute on it and surprise themselves with what they can do. And so that's like a big thing that I'm thinking about with my course is like, how do I create a setup that allows me to like give people instructions to do it, but also like walk them through the process, be there to answer their questions, and just give them that container to feel confident enough to go and actually try it. Because once they do, they'll actually see how much they can do. And I've just found that repeats itself over. I don't know if I explained that perfectly, but like that process, I've seen it repeated with coaching clients where they'll like surprise themselves at what they can do.
It's probably a good parallel for your life in general, just like the willingness to experiment, but also you kind of have to understand that like sometimes you're going to burn a steak or burn chicken,
totally,
or just like completely ruin a meal.
Yeah, 100%. And it's okay. And it's actually going to happen less than you probably think it will, like I don't think that, mistakes that totally ruin meals aren't that common. You might overcook something a little bit. It might not turn out perfect, but for the most part, things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for people to know that.
Yeah, it's a great question and a great answer too, because I remember like in 2018, when I first started cooking, living in New York, there was like such this hurdle to just be like, what the hell do I do? Like, how do I actually cook a steak or make chicken or make some of these dishes taste good? And I remember the first time, like I actually pan-seared a steak and it tasted so good. I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. I can actually do this. Then I start to go down the rabbit hole and learn all these different recipes and techniques. But it's like, it's an interesting point. It's like starting with one or two recipes that almost give the consumer proof of concept of like, yeah, anyone can be a great cook. There's just some technique that you need to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, I think just giving people, you want to give them kind of like steps to follow so that they feel comfortable doing it, but also just make sure to explain to them that like, you don't have to follow these steps exactly. And, you can try different things and all of that. And then people will go do things that they would have never attempted on their own. You know, like I had a client who I sent them this like sushi or not sushi, ceviche guide that I put together, and they made themselves ceviche, and they were like, I would have never had the confidence to like go buy fresh fish, have it be raw, marinated in like lime juice. And they were like, it was actually super easy, but I needed that guidance to actually go out and try it.
So
go ahead.
I was going to say, so I know that you're in a relationship, but if you're single and you have a girl that you like coming over for dinner and you're going to cook her a meal, what are you pulling out of the repertoire to just show her?
I think that, so the answer is going to be different for everybody, but I think that like a very cool thing is to like have a meal that's reflective of maybe your travels or something like that, you know? And this I just think is something cool to have in general, but especially for dating. And it's like, I tell people, if you go travel somewhere and you eat a dish that you really love, like go learn how to make that. And then you can, you know, you have this story that goes along with it. And it's something cool and different. And whether it's like, hey, there's this really cool pasta dish that I had in Italy that I learned how to make. Or for me, it was always like, you know, making tacos with handmade tortillas or something like that. But I also think sometimes that it's like, you don't necessarily have to cook anything super fancy. Like make like a really badass grilled cheese with like sourdough bread and some like really, really good cheese and maybe a homemade tomato soup to go with it. Like people really love and appreciate that kind of thing too. You know, like I remember I made like homemade chicken tenders one time for a date, and like that was super fun and cool and kind of different. So I don't think you need to overthink it.
Dude, I love that. One of the things I love about you and just kind of like the people that you bring into your life is that like cooking is definitely at the center of it. Like we've gone over to your house, shared a meal. It was amazing. One of the people that was there was Morgan.
Yep.
Who, when he tells this, it's like you basically taught him how to walk. He's like, you taught me how to cook. And we've had Morgan's food and it's insane. So I would love to just like talk about that shared passion. Cause like for us, it shows up in our life. Like we have the shared passion of like getting into the podcast, and it's like been super helpful having Brett along like this journey, and like Morgan and you have this cool relationship. So just love to like tap on that topic a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And so Morgan is Morgan Weeks, who runs, he's the house chef and does social media at Force of Nature Meats. And he and I met a couple of years ago, and like, I think at one point he had tallied it up and we had cooked like 100 meals together over the course of it, like something crazy. And we basically, I met him and he was leaving an insurance job that he had and really was getting into cooking and food in a really deep way. And he had the, you know, he had like a base of talent and interest, and he was just like so eager to learn and was always like showing up and asking a ton of questions and paying attention, and then like putting those things into practice in his own life. And he just like, he improved so substantially and so quickly. What's cool is that there's been a few people in my life who I've kind of had that experience with, like a few different roommates and friends who kind of, you know, because I was super into cooking, they started getting into it as well. And like, I think about one of my best friends, Connor, who I met when I moved to LA. We were roommates there. And he grew up in a family that was very like meat and potatoes, kind of, you know, not super into food. Like he hadn't had like any spicy food in like his whole life. And, you know, he just started learning stuff, and he was also super eager and very curious, which I think is what you need if you're going to make progress. But like, just the other day, he's like sending me a picture, and it's like, he's hosting a backyard barbecue. He made food for, you know, 25 people. He's having dinner parties. He's cooking like cool meals for dates and stuff. And it's like, to see that progression from basically having almost, you know, no foundational knowledge is like so cool to me, because it's not just about the cooking. It's like his social life now is he's bringing people together around food. And I just like love to see that.
It's probably crazy to think about like just all the experiences, friendships, relationships that you've cultivated or connections you've formed just by having these like dinner parties, backyard experiences.
Yeah. It's like such a huge part of my social life. And like, I think that there are a bunch of reasons to learn to cook. And that is maybe the number one, is that like, and I think for a lot of people, learning to cook to like save money or eat it healthy is sort of this like gateway drug into learning how to cook, to have the like creative sensory experience and then also have that communal experience. Like if you're at the point where you can cook for a big group of people and bring them together for like a, you know, an amazing hangout, like you've reached the pinnacle, you know?
Yeah, that's like amazing life advice. Like I feel like any 22-year-old guy listening, it's like, go try to throw like a party for your friends. That's, you know, not a Project X style party. Like you're grilling, you're hanging out. Like that intimacy is it's like precious. Like in a lot of ways, you can't really describe how amazing it is to have great food on the table surrounded by great people.
Totally. And you guys have seen, like, we've done some hangouts too. It doesn't have to be complicated, you know, like you get a barbecue going, you grill some steaks, some sausages, you maybe get some really good sourdough bread from a local bakery and throw like a salad together. And like, that can be an amazing meal. You know, it's super simple.
What's crazy is the inputs are so minimal, but people are amazed by it too.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
It's like magic.
Yeah, it is like magic. And it's like the skill set that you know because you've practiced it and you're like, this doesn't take me that much time, but you're creating these amazing experiences for other people.
Yeah, it's really fun. But I really want to emphasize that I think anyone can learn that if they're sufficiently motivated and willing to put in the work. But it's not as hard as I think a lot of people think.
Any core pillars to creating that experience part of the meal? Like not just the food, but just getting the right ambiance?
Yeah, I mean, I think like if you're gonna cook for a group of people, try to do some stuff in advance because then you can be a little bit more present. But it's like, if you can, be outside, you know, get some good music going, like get some good natural wine poured, have the dogs running around. Like those are like, you know, when we've hung out, that's always how it's been. And like, that's really the vibe that you want. It should be like casual and fun. And then, yeah, if you like prep things in advance, the process will be a lot less stressful for you. I think a lot of people that I know, they stress out about hosting, and it's like, you can do a lot in advance that makes it so that in the moment you only have to put a few things together. And yeah, like I said, like keep it simple, like get some really good like meats and cheeses and breads and lay out a charcuterie board for everyone to start with. And then, yeah, like just, you can keep it very simple and people will still be wowed by what you do. They'll have a great time and you'll have a great time.
Yeah.
Worst case, just bring more wine.
Yeah, exactly. Worst case, bring more wine. With your ability to cook so well, I'm just curious, how do you feel about like just going out and experimenting and trying new restaurants or ordering out food? Like, is that something you like to do? Do you not really care that much just because you can make such delicious meals at home?
I think I love like great restaurants. You know, I'm fascinated by cooking and food and like seeing what other cool chefs are doing. And I think when you get to a certain level of cooking, the stuff that doesn't do it for you anymore are sort of these like mid-level restaurants, you know, where you're like, feel like the ingredients aren't that good, but you're still paying a lot and you could do it better at home. And so I don't eat at a lot of those, and I cook most of my food at home and then kind of save the times when I go out for stuff that I'm more like excited about. But like, I think it is important to go out and experience those, especially as a chef, because you'll get really inspired. Like I went to this restaurant in LA this year called Meteora that is just like, they're just doing such cool, creative stuff. And I was like, damn, I need to step my game up. Like that was a really, really cool meal.
Yeah.
And so like in New York, that's one of the things I'm excited for. You know, there's so many of those restaurants there.
What's that new spot in Austin that you posted about that you love?
It's actually not new.
Oh, not new.
It's called Intero. And it's my favorite restaurant in Austin. Really? Like that probably with Dai Due are like two of my favorites. Intero is Italian, super committed to high quality local sourcing, amazing ingredients. They change up the menu all the time. It's super seasonal and it's just the best. I want to say it because I want them to like get more customers, but for like, it's been around forever. And like, it was always like this little secret where I was like, this is the best restaurant in Austin and you can still get a reservation fairly easily. And it's incredible. I'm shocked that more people don't know about it.
Where is it?
It's on Cesar Chavez on the east side.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm curious to get your take on the anti-seed oil movement in the restaurant industry. as an insider, like, do you think that there's a chance that it can work?
So I think that like there has to be enough consumer demand where restaurants will opt into that and probably charge higher prices as a
Mhm.
result, because it's just not gonna happen organically, because it's so much cheaper to not use them. And restaurants are very low margin businesses generally, even the good ones. And so it's like, there's restaurants that are pretty like quality focused, but they still use seed oils. And I think part of that is not understanding how bad they are, but a bigger part of that is that they're so much cheaper. Um, and I think that like the sort of seed oil thing is starting to enter the like pop cultural zeitgeist.
Mm.
Um, and and I don't say that just as someone who's like in those circles on Twitter. Like I'm starting to see it amongst more people. And so I think with that, I think people could probably start demanding it more, and we'll see more restaurants do it. But I wouldn't bet on it being that big of a thing, I think generally.
Mm. It is interesting too. There's definitely a balance with it where I think there's also people that take it in the extreme in the wrong direction where they think that if like a drop of seed oil touches their tongue, they're going to die.
Yeah.
And like life is also meant to be enjoyed too. So like if you're going to go to like a pizzeria back in New York, or you might get laced with some seed oils, but the body's also super resilient. You'll be okay. You've enjoyed a great meal with your family, friends, girlfriend, whoever. And I think that's like important to keep that balance in perspective as well.
It's so important. You can't be obsessed with it, because you'll you won't have a good time, and you'll make sure no one else has a good time if you're constantly complaining about it. But it's like I've said this on Twitter before, but I almost have this theory that there's this like dimension to health that is often ignored, which is like you said, like you're back home with your family and you get a bunch of pizzas or something like that, but you're all like hanging around and you're seeing people you haven't seen in a long time and you're with loved ones. Like that is healthy. That's healthy for you. And the fact that you're eating some pizza that was made with seed oils isn't gonna destroy you. Whereas if you're super anal about it and you get all flustered and stressed about it, it's gonna actually affect you worse, because you're not gonna digest it properly, and like probably other aspects of stress and eating that we don't even fully understand.
Mm.
But yeah, it's also like this is why I'm so big on the home cooking thing. It's like if you cook at home, it's very easy to never have any seed oils in what you cook.
Mm.
And so if you cook most of your meals at home, you're avoiding seed oils most of the time. And then you go out to restaurants and occasionally have them, and it's totally fine. Your body's going to be fine. I think that too many people are striving for health perfection rather than like resilience.
Mm. It reminds me of this. It's like almost like a meme at this point, that when people go travel in Europe, they come back like 5 pounds lighter because they've like been relaxing and enjoying the food over there, and like they eat like pizza and noodles, pasta, all that stuff, and they come back and they're like healthier. So like I feel like there's something to that, like actually being relaxed and enjoying just like kind of like letting go.
Totally. I think there is for sure. The Europe thing is funny though, because I actually go back and forth on this. Or not back and forth, but it's such a common thing that you hear. And sometimes I do wonder, like, I think there's an aspect of it of maybe you're on vacation, maybe you're less stressed, maybe you're walking more. Those could all play big factors in terms of how you feel with what you eat over there. But I've also heard it from people who like lived over there for a long time. And that's where it's like those people were working, they were in their day-to-day life.
Right.
And then they say they come back to the US and they feel like shit. And I think there could be something with like glyphosate, soil quality, microplastics, contaminants. Like, I don't know that the US is like uniquely having issues with. What do you guys have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I lived in Amsterdam and in Italy for a while, and I mean, I definitely feel like the food quality over there is more paid attention to when it comes to just not having toxins or all the pesticides that get sprayed on the food. Like,
Yeah.
they're much more of a, they think of it as preventative as opposed to like, guilty until or innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
Which I think is just the philosophy in the US. Like,
Yeah.
glyphosate is still allowed to be sprayed on everything, and we basically at this point know how bad that is for you, how bad it is for your gut and we still have it in as a major bedrock of the food system.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the problem. It's like it is at the bedrock of the food system. It supports so much production when it comes to crops and different vegetables.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think as time goes on, more stuff is going to come out about glyphosate and just how terrible it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder too, like the mind is so powerful. And sometimes I think about people that say that they're lactose intolerant. I'm like, are you actually lactose intolerant, or have you just been told that you're lactose intolerant by thousands of people? And sometimes the quality of food in Europe is definitely far superior to what it is in the US. But I also sometimes wonder too, people have heard like, oh, when I go and eat bread and pasta in Italy and Europe, I feel fine.
Yep.
And sometimes I wonder, has that just been beaten into their heads that they've almost like placebo themselves and they're just thinking that they're going to feel really good?
For sure.
Like it's probably a combo of both, I would think.
I think it's a combo of both, but I think, like the placebo is so powerful and so real.
Mhm.
And I think that it's still actually like understudied and underutilized for how incredible of a thing placebo is. Placebo is amazing.
It's everything.
And there's almost this like people will talk about placebo negatively. I'm like, no, placebo is like incredible.
It's incredible.
Like the more you learn about it, the more you're like, what it is the body's like natural ability to heal at the highest level because of the mind. It's like we should be leaning into that as hard as we possibly can.
If you can tap into that, you can trick yourself into doing so many amazing things.
You can become superhuman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking a lot about, you're about to embark on this new chapter. You've been in Austin for 5 years, which is like probably one of the longest stretches you've ever been in an individual city.
Yeah. Other than growing up. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, like what kind of learnings are you taking from your Austin experience as you kind of embark on this new chapter to New York and Costa Rica and beyond?
Man, so many different things. I think the biggest takeaway by far is just how much having a great community plays into your experience in a place. Because, I really love Austin and it's been like an incredible place to live. But there are certain things about Austin that aren't as good as other cities. My friend David Perel wrote a pretty interesting article about this. Have you guys read his article about Austin?
No.
He basically talks about how Austin is like not a great city, but it's a great place to live. And it's like it scores like 7 out of 10 on like every dimension, but it just still has this like special thing going. And it's like, Austin's food scene is not as good as New York and LA and some of these other places I've lived. Its nature is not as good as, Colorado or California or whatever it may be. Like there's a lot of things that you could say they're not perfect, but I met such cool people here and had such an amazing community that those factors became a lot less important. And so that's, I think the biggest takeaway is how important that is. The other thing is just, it's pretty interesting, like moving to a place before it really blows up. Like I came here in 2018 and I remember when I moved here, it was not like the obvious move. So many people were like, oh, Austin, like I've heard it's pretty cool. Like what's going on there kind of thing. It wasn't on the radar in the same way. And it was so cheap compared to LA where I came from. And it's kind of an interesting experience to like be in a city as it like really, really blows up and goes from being sort of this like B tier city to really an A tier city now. And the good and the bad that comes with that, I think.
Yeah. My experience with Austin is I feel like everyone's so obsessed with the network and just amazing people here and just the vibe. But everyone's kind of like half in, half out.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, I want a place here, but I also like kind of want to be able to like escape the heat and get out of the
or they're
traffic
like,
downtown.
I want a place here, but like the price of real estate has quadrupled in the last like few years. I think for me, and like I was telling you guys, like I could see myself coming back to Austin, but the biggest thing for me that's lacking here is nature. Like I love the ocean. I love the mountains. You have like good nature here with Barton and the water and stuff like that, but it, not as much as you do in certain other places.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's like this, like you said, it's like this oasis in Central Texas.
Yeah.
And it really shouldn't be an oasis, but it's an oasis because the people in the community are so amazing.
Yeah.
I've never seen a city with just so many like mission oriented people that are into just this space and health and wellness and food and, whatever it is, you can kind of find your group of people here.
Totally. And I think like, I know people who went to San Francisco and kind of the like YC startup era. And they always talk about this like incredible energy that San Francisco had during that time when like there were all these like startups happening and venture funding, and there were zero interest rates. So everyone, money was flowing like crazy. But like you talk about that, you hear about a place having this like zeitgeist at a certain point in time. And like over the past couple of years and still now, I think Austin has that zeitgeist, but not for like the tech startup scene as much as like this combination of health, wellness, sovereignty, Bitcoin, independent thinking, psychedelics, like a lot of it's like a different sort of style of zeitgeist, but there's something special happening here.
I want to talk about Costa Rica for a second, because I remember texting you. You went down for the Costa Rica, is what it was called?
Yeah.
And I remember getting a text back. You're like, you were like, I'm gonna move down here. I'm like, what? Like, that's unbelievable. Like, what made you want to go to Costa Rica? And I'm sure there's a lot to unpack there, but you just had an insane experience down there.
Yeah, I mean, so I've always really loved Latin America in general, and I always thought that maybe I would go back there and live for a little bit, and like I strongly considered going back to Mexico, which I still would. I love Mexico, but Costa Rica is pretty interesting for a number of reasons. One is it's like very safe compared to a lot of other countries in the region. Drinking too much sparkling water, it's like incredibly kind of like clean and well maintained, and there seems to be a strong cultural phenomenon there where people are very proud of like the natural resources that Costa Rica has. So you get like a lot of really good quality food down there, which I think is super cool. But I think the big thing was that when I was starting to think about leaving Austin, I really wanted to go somewhere where I could switch up my lifestyle, and I wanted to be by the ocean and have that like very nature heavy experience. And I've gotten a lot more into surfing over the past few years, and like it's a paradise down there. Like when I was down there, I went surfing every day, and it's like these perfect waves. You're literally just in board shorts. You don't have to wear like a wetsuit or anything. And I really, really like have been falling in love with surfing. And there's like so much there from not only is it amazing exercise, but it's like meditative. You're out there in the ocean, you're in nature. There's so many things there. And so I was like, man, I want to go somewhere where I can just lean into that really heavily and do that like every day. And in addition to a place that's like cool, interesting, has a cool community, has really good food, and Costa Rica fit the bill.
Just aesthetics maxing every single day.
That is the plan, yeah.
That's the plan. Sweet, well, dude, I know it's going to be an amazing chapter for you, and just like it means a lot for us to be able to get you in studio and do this like right before you headed out, because you've been one of our favorite friends and people that we've met here, and it just means a lot to just form a friendship with you, and we appreciate you coming in studio, and we know that the next chapter is going to be amazing. So best of luck, brother.
Thank you both. It's been so awesome, like getting to know both of you guys and having that be like one of the first Twitter to IRL friendships that I had, and also just seeing what you guys have been doing. It's been super inspiring for me. Like, when we initially connected over a year ago, things looked a lot different than they do now.
Yes.
And to see like you guys have been so consistent with your podcast. Like you guys are just machines when it comes to churning out content. And seeing that has really like pushed me to be more consistent with my content. All the cool guests that you guys have gotten on, like, I think it goes to show that like you just got to go for it. And now with like launching your guys' first brand, I remember the conversations we had about brand launching a long time ago, throwing a health summit in Nashville, expanding the team. It's super, super awesome. And like, I remember when I first connected with you guys, I was like, these Me Mafia guys are going places. So it's cool to see, but not surprising.
Dude, it's been fun. And you best believe that we're coming down to Costa Rica and cooking some steaks and surfing.
Hell yeah. Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks, Myles.
Thank you guys.
Appreciate it.